out in the woods. Just because this has happened and apparently on very rare occasion continues to happen, that doesn't mean that if you live next to a woods, you can count on being jumped if you go out to refill the bird feeder in the backyard. Moving forward, John, you know about a situation where a person was attacked. You've got some updates about a story that you shared last time around on episode 14. Please tell us about that.
Absolutely. Just before I go into that, though, can I comment on what you just said?
Sure.
First of all, it's brave of you as a host to come out and say this. And you are not saying this for ratings. You're saying this for one reason, and it's because it has to be said. One of the things I realized about your show is that you share real concrete information. Stuff I've learned for a long period of time. I've come to know some things, and on your show you bring those things up on your own findings and things you've done from interviewing people and whatnot. You don't hold back. I mean, I'm sort of sick and tired of these candy floss interviews with people. Sometimes you hear them. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. And they don't get down to the brass tacks about stuff. They just want to talk about the lighthearted stuff, and they don't want to get to the nitty-gritty. People know these kind of interviews. I would rather be told the truth. You know what I mean? I'd rather hear the facts. I mean, we're so sick and tired in this world of hearing a bunch of stuff about candy floss. It's just no meat and potatoes. You want the real meat. You want to get down to the facts of what's going on. Like you just mentioned the bears. You know, that's a great example. I mean, how many bears are out there? I mean, the different kinds of bears. There are a lot of bears. But how many people get attacked by bears? Well, you know, there are bear attacks. Now, but they're not that many compared to other encounters with bears. I've actually had a bear encounter before. And trust me, I knew it was a bear encounter right away. Bears are very animated and that they're there, and they want you to know they're there. And they're not really looking for people to encounter. In fact, they're scared of people, and they don't want to have to engage people, really. There's the odd bear out there that's a man-eater, but the fact of the matter is there's not nearly as many dogmen as there are bears. And we rarely have dogman encounters that are violent with death involved, or, you know, violence or death involved, where they actually, you know, engage the human, or humans in that case. Well, then, think about it. If there actually are some accounts of people getting attacked, or they would attack, and they have such few numbers, and you compare them to the numbers of bears that attack and the bears that don't attack, just let that concept kind of sink in. Maybe these things are a little more dangerous than people let you on to think. And I'm not saying that to scare anybody either. I'm just saying that it's good to understand what you're dealing with so that you can take a more educated role in where you spend your vacation. You know, you can look around and be a little more observant about your surroundings. Not to be afraid, but just so you can be more informed, so you can make more informed decisions. So maybe you're not so relaxed and letting the kids run into the wilderness on their own, running around. Maybe they should just stay in the front yard, you know? Just little precautions like that sometimes make all the difference in the world. Just all I wanted to say. And it is, like I said, Vic, it's very good of you to come out and say this. It's not good to give people, it doesn't feel good all the time. I mean, to come out and have to say to people, you know, I don't mean to make you afraid, but sometimes they do attack. But the fact of the matter is I would rather be a lot more informed than to go in the woods ignorant, thinking these things are my friends. When it comes right down to it, they would rather me not be around, and it's not worth.
You know what, though, John? This is a double-edged sword here. I feel like it is my responsibility having this information to come out and present it so that, just like you mentioned, people can make an informed decision on whether they want to go out and do certain things. At the same time, along the course of the way of doing this show, I've gotten quite a few emails and messages and other ways from people that have talked about how listening to the show and learning about the things with regards to dogmen that have been shared on the show, how all that has changed their lives, how they can't do certain things now that they used to love doing. Family outings, you know, annual campouts. You know, there's a guy that contacted me and told me how he used to leave his dog outside at night, and now he brings the dog inside and he battens down the doggy door at night because he's worried about a dog man coming through and all of that. Being told stories like that from listeners, you know, it really takes a toll on me knowing that I can negatively affect people like that. I feel like I'm doing them a service like you just mentioned, but it really does take a toll, and I feel bad that by letting them know about this hidden information, I'm affecting their lives, unfortunately, in a negative way.
You know, it's funny that you say this. I mean, again, you bring up a lot of good questions and things that trigger a lot of things in my head. And the one thing that you just mentioned there was you feel bad about this, but I'm going to be perfectly honest. I was a little too lax going back in the woods, even after my encounter. I was. And I just loved it so much, I just thought, you know, it's funny. I'm like a lot of people out there that have heard about Dogman. I didn't realize that the potential for actual attack, for whatever reason, could really be there. And I never really thought much about it. People don't understand that when you're educated about something like this, and anyone can be, that you're dealing with something that is extremely real. This world is more than what we think in our little candy-coated boxes we live in. There's much more. I mean, people have to stick their heads out and understand that there's more. And take a look. It's not going to cost you anything to take a look. And I can understand when you say that you feel bad about it, to, you know, say to people, you know, this is attack, and warning people, and now they can't really do certain things they love. But you know what? Personally, I thank you, because after learning what I've learned, even in more detail, you know, throughout your series of interviews done up to this point, I'm more informed, and I would much, much rather be alive in one piece than to be attacked by a dogman. People have said, what's it likely to be attacked by a dogman? You know, if you want to use your imagination, I would say not really get into it because it's kind of a bummer, but let's just say that there's a lot of werewolf movies out there that are pretty accurate. Not that they think they're werewolves, they're different creatures, but when it comes to the tools they use, they're not that different. And if you think that's scary in a werewolf movie, well, in real life, it's probably many times scarier. So I would say, hey, I would rather be safe and still find other ways to have fun and live my life than to be killed in the most horrific way I can imagine. So, I mean, trust me, Vic, they'll thank you later. Sometimes it's all to do with being thankful for what you haven't run into in life and things that haven't happened, and staying safe. Safe doesn't necessarily mean boring. There's plenty of other things to do. I mean, I love going in the woods, but trust me, I find other things to do, and I'd much, much rather be in one piece than to have myself in a situation where I run into something like this.
You know of an update with regards to one of the topics we talked about last time around on episode 14 that touches on this topic. Tell us about what you found out about that Australian hunter and what happened to him.
I was going to coast from what you said right into this. That's one of those topics that's not talked about enough on radio. So now we find ourselves having to go longer and deeper into it. It's just what happens when you run into the meat when it comes to a real interview with a really great host like yourself on a show where you're free to speak your mind and really share what really matters. I'll tell you right away, this thing that occurred on the last show, episode 14 I was on, basically I went through a very general description of something that happened. It was because I didn't have enough information at the time. I recently got some information when I first went on the interview, and I didn't have a chance to go into more detail with the person I got it from, which was actually my girlfriend. My girlfriend speaks like 5 different languages, and so she was watching an interview. Well, it was a documentary, but everything mentioned in the documentary, it is something that reflects on everything that's said about Dogman accurately. And it's accurate. It's like really ridiculously accurate. I see a lot of documentaries talking about Dogman, and a lot of them are just, they're there just to entertain. They don't really worry or take the time to consider the accuracy of the information from what I see, in my personal opinion. And I'm big on accuracy and truth. I'm very big on it. I get a little long-winded sometimes. Apologize for that. But it comes right down to it. People are worth it. You're worth getting as much solid, concrete evidence and truth as much as you can. This world, I mean, it's full of lies. And I'll be perfectly honest. I'm willing to sign an affidavit saying that this is all true from my personal opinion, from as much as I can understand when it comes to interviews and my personal experiences, which you don't hear often. So with the things I'm about to say, I'm not making them up. They're as truthful as I can make them sound because they are truthful. And you don't hear that every day. People usually have to be asked for that. I'm coming right out saying I would do that, no problem, because I'm not lying. I'm not deluded. I've done my homework, and I take a personal responsibility sharing this information. And the information that I got from her was something very solid, and it was very interesting. Basically, I stated in the last interview that a man was killed in Australia while looking for Dogman. And he was a 50-year-old man who was a Dogman researcher. And this was before the time of the internet. And so he had knowledge about some areas in Australia where Dogmen are known to be. In fact, some of the people there at the time said, don't go into certain areas because they're there. And he wanted concrete evidence. This man seemed to be borderline obsessed, if not obsessed himself, which I think he would have to be to go after a Dogman. And he took his rifle, he went off into the woods, and he went looking for it. And while this man went out there in the woods to look for Dogman, this is what happened. Basically, he was not found for like 2 weeks. And when he was found, his head was removed from his body, and his gun was found with 2 shots missing. The police have looked at the area, and they figured out what happened. Apparently, he went off, he was shooting at something else, and it seems that something from above and then behind him clawed him from his heart all the way up through his neck to his head, decapitating him, removing his head. His heart was actually, I think the words my girlfriend described was utterly destroyed. It sliced his heart in pieces. I mean, that's a tough organ. And she said that the claws were like sharp knives. Even with sharp knives, the power it would take to do that is unimaginable. And it sliced up and took his head off, and then that was it. There was no other bite marks or anything else like that. If that happened anywhere else in the world, you can't actually say what it could be, because, see, animals don't just slice and walk away. Animals, what they do is they usually, like a bear, for example, will maul. They'll maul their target. They'll bite the target, come down, and they'll be able to feel bite wounds and stuff like that. Nothing just slices and walks away. Even tigers and stuff like that. I mean, hunters know this. This was really there. The wound was ridiculous. He was found dead, decapitated. No part of him was eaten. Just that one hit. And they think whatever it was came down from the tree. And the funny thing is, I told my girlfriend this, and she didn't know this. She doesn't know everything about Dogman. I have to tell her a lot of things, actually. And I told her, did you know that they're known for going up into trees? You know, Vic, you're always saying that, hey, keep your eyes looking up, too. You know, I want to remind people of that, because you're right. Because she told me this without knowing. We didn't know. If I didn't know this, and she told me this, and I told Vic would sit there and tell me, hey, they're known for going up into trees. You don't have people telling each other information that they don't know about and having it turn out to be lies like this. Like these double-blind things are not something that you come across every day and have it turn out to be phony. It freaked me out.
You know what's ironic about that, too, is they also seem to prefer to attack from behind.
She didn't know that either. Yeah, that's really freaky. These things are cunning. Those scrolls they found in Egypt, they are dogs in detail, like we talked about on the show here. Like all the interviews you have with people, this is stuff, a lot of those details were mentioned. Even how unkillable the thing is, unless you take a spear to the heart to them. Take a spear right into the heart, that'll kill them. I mean, you have people on the show talking about, you know, shooting the thing, and it still comes at them. You know, some people think, well, I shot it in the chest, though. Like Larry mentioned that. And he's a vet, and this guy has great aim, and I talked to the guy, he's a good guy, honest. And I'm telling you, there's a good chance, I think, in my personal opinion, because I used to work out, so I understand what it takes for muscle to properly function. It takes a lot of strong bone. And so if the bone is big enough and strong enough, and this thing is like 7 feet tall, then the bone structure could be incredibly dense. So you can understand if it hit a rib and maybe chipped the rib or broke the rib, it might not necessarily be able to penetrate the heart or even hit the heart. So I can maybe understand maybe why that didn't happen. Maybe. I'm just taking a guess here. I'm not an expert when it comes to bullets and guns and whatnot, but I can say that it takes a lot of bone, strong, dense bone, to sustain that level of strength. And it's one of the things in nature that a lot of people don't understand about. So when this thing came down and actually sliced this man and took his head right off, they walked away. And they're very cunning. And he was firing at something else. If he was looking for a dog man, I don't think he was shooting at koala bears, because he wouldn't want to give away his position. People there in the local area said that they were out there, did not it was out there. And these things are anything like wolves. They're going to be in packs. I mean, he said sometimes they run with coyotes. I mean, heck, where I live, there are coyotes. I've heard them even where had my encounter once. I've heard coyotes in that exact area. I've heard them. I've encountered them. That's really freaky. That's some freaky stuff. And when people say when they go in the woods hunting for dogman, people need to understand that they're going to know you're there before you do. And I mean, before you know you're going to go there, but they're going to know that you're there before you think that they're even there. And the thing is, they have incredibly good senses, and that's one of the things it talks about in those scrolls. They have really good senses. They're very cunning. They're very smart. They're very powerful, and they're hard to kill. And unfortunately, we're not talking about a horror film. We're talking about reality here. And it's just better to be informed than, be on a slab.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. It's funny you mentioned the whole Australia topic, because last week in the middle of the night, I received an email from a Yowie hunter who had taken some pictures, as it turns out, years ago of what looked to me like bona fide dogman prints he found in the Blue Mountains. I'm going to post some of those pictures that he sent me of those, what seemed to be dogman prints. They look like Type 3 dogman prints, to be more exact. I'm going to post some of those pics in the YouTube version of this show, so the listeners will have a chance to check them out and see what I'm talking about here.
Could you refresh some of the people on what a Type 3 dogman is?
The whole scoop on that is you've got in my opinion, two main categories of cryptids, creatures out there roaming the woods that people call dogmen. You've got what I call a canine type. It looks like the traditional modern-day werewolf, like what you would see on the movies like Underworld, for example. They can look like that. They can look a little different from that, too. But you've also got a category that is called Type 3 that looks very similar to what you would expect a Bigfoot to look like, but this specimen has got a muzzle, whereas a Bigfoot has a flat face like a human, for example. And also the Type 3s have claws. Now, understand there are a lot of people out there that mistakenly think that Type 3s are a type of Bigfoot, but they can't be. Every indication, when you look at the features Sasquatch seem to have, they seem to have toenails, they seem to have fingernails, and other physical traits that point towards them being a type of ape. Well, apes are primates, that's no surprise to anyone. Understand that primates don't have claws. Primates have nails, fingernails and toenails. The fact that Type 3 dogmen have claws would preclude the chance of them being a primate. In other words, that would take away the chance of them being a type of Sasquatch. Claws, they have their own blood supply, they're attached to bone, whereas fingernails don't have that blood supply, and they are not attached to bone. There are definite differences between the two. Having said all that, when you look at these pics on the YouTube version of the show, you'll see that these prints look very similar to Bigfoot prints, but the one noticeable difference is they appear to have claws at the ends of each toe print. Moving forward, you told me that you've got an update on the story that you shared in episode 14 about your girlfriend's grandmother's encounter that she had in Morocco, I think you said?
It was actually the place that's next to Morocco. See, I made the mistake because I thought her grandmother lived their entire life. And I realized, oh no, when she was a child, she lived in Algeria, which is next to Morocco. It's pretty much the same kind of environment, the northern top part that's near it's sort of closer to Spain. It's like there's a giant, the Albornian Sea is like between that and Spain, and they were at the northern part on the waters of that. Now back then, there used to be a lot of forest. A lot of forest. If you go on Google Maps now or Google Earth, you're going to look at it and you're going to go, hey, there's not a lot of forest there. How could they be there? Well, back then there was a lot of forest, and this was 1935. And well, actually, tell you the truth, it's not even that far away. Really, if you look at the map from, what's the name? Italy. Yeah, Italy. It's just like across the sea. There are parts of the sea that are not that far. It would be very difficult for something to skip across to one island and then finally over to Italy or vice versa. So, and they are known to travel. That's another thing people need to understand. Just because in your area, if you think, oh, well, nothing could ever show up here. Oh, yeah, they could. They show up in the darndest places. See, when I was told this, my girlfriend didn't really know much about dog man. She didn't know much about any of this stuff. Like most people, she didn't know. And when she told me stuff, I filled her in. And she was very much wowed by it, And that happens quite often on the show. People will talk to Vic. And Vic, you'll notice that they'll say things that collaborate with each other. If you're a detective and you're hearing collaborating evidence like this, you're getting pretty close to having an arrest and conviction. So I'm saying people need to understand the concepts of what we're dealing with here. See, what happened back then in 1935, that's a long time ago. When she died when she was 85. It was actually like a year ago in the fall. And my girlfriend spent a lot of time with her grandmother. She used to, play with her grandmother and tease her and stuff like that. And her grandmother would joke around with her back, and they used to love it. That's the way they were. Well, this is one thing that she never teased her about. She did it once when she was really little and decided not to do that again because it's something that stuck with her her entire life, all the way until she was 85. What happened was, and I'm just going to reconstruct the whole thing, what happened, just so people can understand if they haven't heard episode 14 yet. What happened was, her grandmother, and it's actually her sister, last time I said it was her neighbor, and they went out into the woods to collect firewood early in the morning. Now back then they lived in a different town than they do nowadays. Children are a little more free to run around and whatnot and do things and help out and be a part of the community in their household. And so they went out to get wood for the breakfast for that morning. They lived in a small village, and they weren't rich. They weren't that well off. They just had like these houses made of wood, not shacks or anything like that. The house was sitting on concrete, so it wasn't like ridiculously poor. But it just wasn't like a rich thing. It was simply just like a wooden house. And that's important for later, and I'll get into that. Now, they went into the woods, and they were looking for firewood, and it was still dark out, and apparently, from the right of them, out of nowhere, emerged like a 7-foot dog man. Immediately, they noticed all the detail. It was right next to them. It was like literally just a few feet away from them. It didn't even really look at them, but it acknowledged their existence with this disgruntled, angry kind of vocalization, like maybe it scared away something it was hunting. It didn't really spend it. It was like, I guess they were too puny for it to really respond too much. But it was very angry and very upset. It had the whole dog head look. It had the claws, the hands. It had even hips, was what she said. Like a man's hips. And very strong legs. The legs were canine. And like you mentioned before, Vic, I want to say the last encounter, those were claws and not nails. Nails would not do that. Those claws that killed that man before, they were claws, and they said they were claws. So that's important to note that authorities said those were claws. Now, they thought that when this thing emerged that they were going to die. And it just ran off in like a couple of bounds into the woods, and then it was gone. They said not only was it gone out of sight, it was gone out of sound. It didn't make any more sound. It was huge, but it didn't make any more sound. This is what unnerved me when she told me these details, because what I ran into the dark that one night, long ago, whatever it was ran at me. It seemed to have intent, and I don't know what it was. At first, I thought, because I thought it was my friend, that the intent was to scare me or something, or to freak me out. Not that it was I want to freak him out intent. It was just intent. I assumed the intent was to just kind of jump out in the woods and go boo, kind of a thing. But once it stopped, I didn't sense that anymore. And I said, "How you doing, Steve?" And it turned into confusion. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up at this point is because when it ran away, just as I heard my friend's voice, it did like a 180 and turned and started to bound away. I say bounding because I couldn't make out the footsteps. It didn't sound like, 1, 2, 1, 2, but it also didn't sound like 4 legs. It sounded like a weird collaboration of maybe both. But I heard it for the first few couple bounds or first couple steps, and then I heard silence. But people have to understand that when you're back in those bush-like areas, like I have been for years, I hear people go to the woods for like yards and yards and yards. I mean, it's like like an elephant in a china factory. It's a bush. It's not just a forest. It's noisy. I mean, there's a lot of broken branches all over the ground and everything. It's easy to hear them. But when it gets with pads, foot pads, it's easy to end up going into problem mode. But it went silent just after about 30 feet. And so when she mentioned that, it scared the dickens out of me. In the story, they took off and ran back home and told their parents. And their parents right away believed them. These people in the village, they would talk about these things in the woods. Like they had a healthy relationship with wolves that lived around the area. And they were fine with the wolves. They were happy with the wolves. They used to sometimes feed them. You hear about stories people have when it comes to having like this sort of a village relationship with a pack of wolves. You can actually look this kind of stuff up and find people getting along with them. It was actually that kind of relationship. Wolves didn't mind them every once in a while. They got fed by them and left them alone. And, it's a healthy respect kind of a thing. I don't think people should feed wolves, though. These people back then, they grew up around these wilderness areas like this, so they knew what they were doing. So I don't suggest people do that because there's probably a right and a wrong to do everything. And the wrong part of that could be being bitten or worse. So don't do that. But they had a good relationship with them. But unfortunately, they knew these other things were out there, and they said to people not to go out there. Don't go out in those woods. And here's the ironic part. People would go missing, including children, and they would never see them again. And I can't say 100% that they're all dogman. But to say they're not, I think is pretty ignorant, or at least extraordinarily naive. Now, the rest of this story gets a little more disturbing if you had any kind of experience before like this. Apparently, before and after this encounter, they have actually had, in the middle of the night, something banging on the walls of their house. And like I said before, their houses are made of wood. Not like a cabin, which has really thick walls necessarily. Some cabins are made of logs and stuff. This isn't like logs. These are boards. So whatever hit the house, it's like it's standing right there. And it would freak everyone else in the house out. And every once in a while, they would hear outside the windows heavy breathing. It's the same heavy breathing they heard out in the woods. That's another thing I forgot to mention, is that the breathing had a very deep breathing sound it made when it came out of the woods. And it had very deep red eyes. Actually, the eyes were really, really red. And I asked her, was it glowing or was it just red naturally? And she said, I couldn't tell. Well, not that she couldn't tell, but her grandmother said that she couldn't tell. They couldn't tell if it was glowing or if it was actually just a reflection. Probably reflection because they have great night vision. So it's hard to say, but some animals, apparently, when they get angry, it turns out even people, sometimes you hear about their eyes changing color. And there's probably some reason for that, but I'm not a biologist, I don't know. So anyways, so in the middle of the night, sometimes it would have that happen, even before and after, like they were letting their presence known. Like stay away from the woods, we're out there. And I don't know about you, Vic, but if I was in a house and I heard heavy breathing like that outside my window, I'd move. And it turns out, actually, that they did. They ended up moving to the next village over where it wasn't as bad, or not actually happening much at all. For some reason, that one area was singled out.
Yeah, if something like that happened to me, John, I definitely have a Century 21 moment.
That's good.
Now, John, you sent me 3 pictures that show the area where you had this encounter that night. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post them in the YouTube version of this show so that the listeners can not only look at the footprint photos from Australia, but they can also take a look at these 3 photos that you sent me as well. If you don't mind, please tell us what to look for in each of the 3 pics.
The first picture, you'll see a root system and some trees, and the roots are almost like a stepping place where you can easily get up onto the plateau. That little root system you see there, I've walked up about 1,000 times in my life, and where this took place was really close to the encounter I had. It's about 50 or 30 feet to the left of that root system I was talking about in the interview. While I heard what was over there, I could hear it as I was climbing up, and I remember thinking that was my buddy, probably was getting wood or something, right? I'm thinking he's probably going to try to jump me. So I was walking up there, and I was starting to turn to the left, and I'd start to walk through the bush, right through the campsite, knowing he was probably going to jump out, you know, the way guys are with each other and try to scare me. And that's when it charged at me. Now, after the incident, and if people want to hear about the details of that, they'd have to go back and check it out on episode 14 for more details if they want to. But there's one detail I will give, though, and that is when it charged me, and I smiled. I said, "How you doing, Steve?" And then it stood there. I'm telling you, when it charged me, some people think it sounds like some kind of a bluff charge. This thing got within like a few feet of me. I could have slapped it, you know? And remember, I didn't know what was going on. I looked off, and as soon as I heard my friend off in the distance, after I said, "How you doing, Steve?" the second time, this thing, I got this feeling, the intention went from whatever it was before, I just sensed intention, to like a sense of confusion. And I think it was because my mistaking it for something else, like my buddy, made it think, you know, this guy's up to something weird and didn't want to mess with me, because animals don't usually want to risk a lot by attacking if they're unsure about what their target is and what's going on. Because injury in the woods in the wild usually means death to animals. I think that's the one sense, and people should take that into account when understanding why animals don't just go crazy and attack people. Now, what happened was, when I ran towards my buddy, who was over in the campsite about a strong stone throw from this area here, I ran out of this next area, in this next picture. You'll see this forest with this path, or this path. So you see this tree-like area with sort of a river to the left, and usually during the summer it's dried up, but you can clearly see how dark it is in that camp-sited area in there. It's very dark, and at night it's like pitch black. And I ran on that trail, running towards where I took that camera picture. And so basically, when I said that I ran and it was dark and I couldn't see, and eventually I started seeing the flicker of the flames from the campfire, it kind of screwed up my night vision. Well, you can see the ground, how it's starting to go up, and then, well, it starts to go up and down like crazy, like a roller coaster, and I started tripping and falling. So you have an idea of the kind of grounding I was dealing with. But yeah, that's how dark it was in there. So you can see even during the day with the sun this bright, you look in there, it's dark. So imagine what I went through when I ran into that thing. There's no chance of even seeing an outline around 12 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock. I think it was around maybe 11:30. And then the last picture, you'll notice there's a log and like some sticks on the ground. That's where my buddy was camping. That's where he ran in looking like a, a wild man. Like I saw something in the woods that would put the fear of the dead in anyone's eyes. Basically, I ran into the light radius of the campfire in that last picture where the campfire would have been. There's sticks on the ground, and there's a big giant log, and that's where my buddy was camping. And I ran into that area looking like a possessed man. And they were looking at me like, "What's wrong?" And I was looking at the borderline where the light radius was and waiting for something to come through the woods to do us harm and stuff. And I'm telling you, it was one of the most, I think the longest moment, the first 2 minutes, when I ran into that light radius, actually. I mean, I was reflecting back and thinking about it, like, what was it like when I first ran back to this area? Because last time I didn't really talk about it too much. It was long. Because what happened in my mind's eye view at this point, I went from, this is my friend, to this was like a potential monster. Because it didn't reflect anything that even begins to be around the area where I live. And so my mind was split between reality and what I thought was fantasy kind of a thing, right? I didn't know what I was going to run into. So let's put it this way. I had no need for caffeine. I was wide awake. And I stayed wide awake for a couple hours after that. And then I decided for some strange reason that I didn't want to sit there for the rest of the night. And around 2 or 3 in the morning, I sharpened a stick and walked home and said to myself, anything jumps me. I was still afraid. I wasn't stupid. I just wanted to go home, and the thing had me rattled, and I just wanted to get home. But that's where it all happened. That's 3 good shots of where it all took place, and I took those a few years ago, actually.
You know what? I'm so glad, John, that you didn't get a chance to see whatever it was, what it looked like.
Yeah, just hearing it and experiencing what I did experience was bad enough. People think, my God, you got something charged at you in the middle of the night, and it didn't match any known animal around, and it had all these strange characteristics. And I mean, some of the stuff I learned after the fact, like it made noise, basically rustling around doing its own thing, but when it took off, after about 30, 40 feet, it stopped making sound. I never ran into anything that stopped making sound after that, especially in these woods, because these woods are really bushy, and they make noise. I could hear people so far away. I could tell if someone's at this campsite, the third plateau here, that's what it's called. This is where it took place, that dark hole where the forest is. When that happened there, people camped there. I have camped there and had campfires there since I was 15 years old. And I'm telling you, it can get very dark in there. It's very isolated, but when you could easily hear people there. I mean, you could be way back walking. You could be another 2 or 3 minutes to getting there walking, and you could clearly still hear people over there sometimes, depending on what they're doing. But you can definitely hear people in the woods. And for that thing to stop making sound, just like what happened with my girlfriend's grandmother, when the thing took a couple leaps and bounds and it was gone in the woods and made no sound, it reflected exactly what I heard back there in that dark spot. It looks creepy even during the day. Like, look at that. At night, it's really hard to see.
Those 2 pictures are very creepy. Like you mentioned, in that area where you ran out of, towards where you snapped the photo, you can see it's broad daylight outside of that canopy, but underneath the canopy, it's dark. It's just black.
It's funny you mention that because that's what I noticed. I ran out of there because I ran towards where the picture was taken. I ran towards the cameraman, which was me, later. And I came out and I could see, but when I was in there, I couldn't see. I mean, previously before, I think you thought that I saw the outline. I didn't get to see an outline. I couldn't see anything. In fact, I could sense it. My voice was bouncing off something, like if you were near a telephone pole, you could sense your voice bouncing back a bit from it. People could do these tests where they blindfold themselves, they get close to something, the voice will bounce back. It's the same kind of thing, right? But I was looking for a head shape. Couldn't see anything. It was that pitch dark. But I am naturally good in the dark, so I knew which direction to turn and stuff like that, like the very first place, so I knew where I was going. I would have to keep these things in my head. And when it ran away, like I pictured the whole thing in my mind. I've been there so many times, I just know it really well, like the middle of your living room kind of a thing, right? So I was able to easily be able to find this little path and then run out. But I love that place. Unfortunately, I don't feel safe enough to ever go back unless I have a bunch of people with me, or I can't let other people go alone, kind of a thing. So if I have more information in the future or more encounters, unfortunately, which I don't want to have, I'll let you know, Vic, for the sake of the people, so they have more understanding of what's going on. But personally, I would never want to run anything like that ever again.
Given what you know about now with regards to dogmen, and given what happened to you that night back in those woods, I don't think anyone could blame you for being a little timid about the idea of going back there. So that's perfectly understandable. Well, I'll tell you what, John, it's about time to wrap the show up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, just for people to be extraordinarily careful when they're out there. Understand if you feel like you have to go in the woods, keep your eye out. If you think there's a dog man around or you feel an unnatural feeling of fear, don't fight it. Leave. But leave in a calm manner. Don't test anything like this. If you happen to run into something like this or think it's there, don't panic. Don't be afraid anyways. Just understand that this is something that could exist that's out there. Okay? And when I say could exist, I mean you could actually run into it. But you most likely won't. And if you do, it most likely won't do anything to you. But here's the thing. You need to be informed. You need to understand what these things are. And that's why listening to Vic's show is such a great idea, is you learn about, what people are running into and what's the best way to avoid these things. And sometimes it's better just to avoid the whole subject of going in the woods in the first place. But if you do go in the woods, go in groups, because I think that's the safest way to go. And if someone's hell-bent on seeing a dog man, just maybe stay in your car, drive around, keep your eye out, do that. It's important to be safe and to be informed, to not be afraid. That's all I can say.
Good words as always, John. I really do appreciate the compliments. I don't deserve most of them, that's for sure, but nonetheless, I appreciate it. I also appreciate, like I said, you coming on. Thanks again for coming back.
No problem, Vic. And if I have any more updates, I'll definitely let you know.
That sounds good. Well, as always, don't be a stranger, okay?
Absolutely, Vic.
Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you want to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you. Episode 29. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight is John Blatt. John, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Oh, thanks, Vic. Thanks for having me on.
For starters, John, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I was born in suburbs of Chicago, and until about the age of 8, moved to Ohio for most of my childhood until I left for the Air Force at the age of 20. And through a course of life and many other interesting things, I ended up in the Pacific Northwest, and I love it here. I've always wanted to live up in the Pacific Northwest, and mostly because of my interest in Sasquatch. I've been here for about 8 years now, and one of the things that I'm very passionate about is primitive skills. I love to spend a lot of time in the wilderness and practice what they call bushcrafting or primitive skills,
basically go into the woods with nothing. Of course, I go in with my clothes and everything else, but I like to try to live as naturally as I can when I'm in the forest. It's my sanctuary. I'm a fairly spiritual person, so I really love to go into the woods and feel at home there. That's where I'm at.
Let me ask you this, John. When you were small, your mother shared a very interesting story with you about a friend who told her about an incident or a series of incidents that he experienced involving a baby's cry. Could you share that story with us?
Sure. When I was around the age of 10 or 11, my mother used to do house cleaning for people, and one of the places that she got hired to do cleaning for was this house out in the country, pretty far away from any town. She became friends with the owner of the house, and one day during the course of conversation, the owner told her an experience that was passed down in their family when the house was first built back in the mid-1800s. At the time, it was fully forested area. Now, a lot of it is farmland out there, but when your great-great-grandfather, who first owned the house and had a family there, told a story and passed it down through generations of an experience that they had one night. The father was married and had some children. The father had gone into work in town and would get dropped off at the beginning of the driveway. The driveway would go down about a couple hundred yards. I've been out there before when I was a boy. So it would be a decent walk at night to walk a couple hundred yards through the forest to your house. And the story that was relayed to my mom, and she relayed that to me, was that he was dropped off at this road. It was the practice every night, I guess, when he was working. As he was walking down the dirt road to his home, he heard a baby cry in the forest. Kind of far away, but enough where he could make out that it was a baby cry. And he at first was very concerned because he had a baby of his own at the time. So he at first wanted to go into the woods, but it's like he didn't have any light source, and going into the woods in the middle of the night didn't make any sense to him. But he was still fairly concerned, but he kept walking, and the sound would happen, and then it would be silent for a while, and as he continued walking, he heard the sound again, and it sounded a little closer, and then he continued to walk, and as he continued down the driveway, the baby cry kept getting closer and closer to where he was as he was walking, and he started to pick up the pace. You know, you didn't really know what to think about it. He was upset because of the possibility it could be his own child in the forest in the middle of the night crying. And he didn't have any answers, of course, since he was experiencing this, not being with his family. And as he got near the end of the driveway or the road to his house, it curved to the right, and there's a big farmhouse there. And as he made the turn around the bend there, the sound came right up to the edge of the forest. And he had this overwhelming sense that he needed to go into the forest to the sound of the baby crying. And he started walking towards the sound, and he stopped himself, and he just knew that it didn't make any possible sense that it could be his child. An infant child can't walk through the woods in the middle of the night, you know, and cover the distance that it did. So logically, he knew that it couldn't be his child. He got quite afraid at that point and started running to his house, and he ran up on the porch, went through the door, shut the door, and locked it. Almost immediately after he locked the door and was standing in disbelief of what had just happened to him, he heard footsteps come up onto the porch, and the doorknob moved, and like it was trying to open up the door to come in, whatever it was. And then he could hear the footsteps leaving the porch. And then shortly after that, from the back of the house where they had kept quite a bit of livestock, knew that they had chickens and I believe some goats. I think even they had a cow or two. And they heard these horrible screams, cries and wails, and they didn't know what to think. And they could hear the animals being destroyed in the back of the house. Horrible sounds that came from out back. And the next morning, I don't know if they got much rest or not after that experience, but in the morning after the sun came up, they went outside and all their livestock had been destroyed. A normal predator would go after one chicken or goat, then eat it. It didn't look like that was the case, that everything had been torn apart, almost like it was upset that it didn't get what it wanted. I'll always remember when my mom relayed that story to me. If you knew my mom, she didn't like anything like that. She wasn't into any of these scary stories or scary movies or anything that has to do with the paranormal or anything like that. So she wasn't too fond necessarily of wanting to tell it, but she did tell it to my sister and I, and of course I never forgot it. And I don't think I ever will.
Oh, I don't think I'm ever going to forget that story either. If I'm ever out in the woods again, John, and I hear a baby crying, guess what I'm going to think about? And also, too, for the listeners, I know I'm going to get more emails on this, but yes, dogmen do jiggle doorknobs and try to manipulate them to try and get into structures. I hate to say that, like I said, I'm probably going to get a lot of emails on that, but it's true. That story about the baby cry sound, that does tie into something that John's going to share with us later on in the show, but that's down the road. Before we leave the topic of your childhood, John, I want to ask you about your beliefs when you were young. Were you into Bigfoot? Did you read up on them, or did you not really care much about them?
My early years, I guess I was like any normal kid. I wasn't really exposed to anything, at least in my family, I wasn't really exposed to anything strange or paranormal or anything along those kind of lines. But it wasn't until I had my own experience at the age of 7 that kind of impacted me for the rest of my life. And after that experience, that changed. I would do a lot of my own research and study and reading as much as I could on those subjects. So,
John, you mentioned the encounter that you had when you were 7. The encounter that basically set the table for you and the subsequent encounters that you were to have later on through the course of your life with other cryptids. Could you tell us about that encounter that started everything off?
sure, no problem. When I was 7 years old, I went on a field trip with my school to one of the nature preserves in the general area outside of Chicago, and I remember it being very woodsy. There was a lot of wildlife, and I remember there being like a swamp. It's a swampy area. I remember a lot of that time of my life is kind of fuzzy. You know, back when you're 7 years old, at least at this point in my life, I don't really have a whole lot of details of recollection except of the story that we're about to embark on here. When I was 7 years old, we were walking down this trail in the woods, and I remember being in the back of the class on this trail, this is like really the first time I had ever experienced that. I remember looking to my right down at the ground and seeing a little turtle. Well, I got totally engrossed in this turtle that was on the ground to my right, and as any little boy would, I did not notice that the rest of my class had continued on down the trail without me, and I'm not quite sure how much time had passed by. I think at least enough to where it was probably a few minutes. I remember standing up and looking around and thinking, oh, I'm by myself. As soon as I stood up and looked down the trail, about 25 to 30 feet away was a giant hairy monster. I really remember being just in shock at what it was I was looking at. I didn't know what I was looking at because I had never experienced anything even in the ballpark of a 7-year-old boy, anything like that. And I remember it, I could not see its face. The hair had come over its face. It wasn't as muscular as some other Sasquatch encounters are. They tend to be some of them, very large and muscular. But this didn't seem to be that way. It was fairly skinny. But to me, it was a giant. I was looking up at it, and I remember it gently swayed its arms as it was moving back and forth, and then it let out this wail, like a cry. Not like a baby cry, but like some of the Sasquatch sounds that you can hear on the internet. It was so loud. I remember feeling it in my chest. And the next thing I remember after that, that I was being carried by my teacher, and there were a couple other adults that were around me as we were walking down the trail. So the time the Sasquatch had let out this wail to the time that I was being carried down the trail by these adults, I have no recollection of. I don't know what happened. All I remember is that I was very upset. I was crying, something that I don't really necessarily enjoy talking about, but as a little boy, it was quite embarrassing that I had soiled myself. And I remember the teacher was upset with me that I had run off, and that then on top of it I had soiled myself on top of it. And I was just in a terrible state, of embarrassment of having that experience and of soiling myself, but also of having this encounter. And I remember trying to explain to the adults that I had just seen a hairy monster, and that went just, nobody paid attention to that at all. I was just making up a story to them. Other than those details, I don't really remember a whole lot. I wish I could say that I know more specific details about that experience, but other than those things, I really would like to maybe at some point even do a hypnotic regression to know what happened during that time where I don't have any memory. But that is kind of what started me down this path almost forced me down this path in many ways, of becoming a Sasquatch researcher and being very open to anything and everything that has to do with the unexplained and the mysterious in this life.
One last thing I want to touch on, John, before we leave the childhood segment of discussion. You said that you had night terrors as a result of that encounter.
Yeah, I sure did. For most of my childhood, even into my teen years, I had night terrors, and it didn't happen every night, but I would have these recurring nightmares of what I called, especially when I was younger, I had called the siren monster, because that's the kind of the noise that it made, like an ambulance siren would make. And I remember being very afraid at night sometimes while lying in bed, and especially when I would hear sirens. If you live in the city, you would hear sirens every once in a while at night. Lying in bed and hearing the sirens, I was so afraid, because I was sure that the siren monster was like coming for me. I remember being scared, imagining that coming up the stairs, into my room at night. But I did have ongoing night terrors about scary monsters, and I really didn't understand what that was all about. My parents didn't either. They didn't know what to think about it all. I didn't have anything like that before this experience. And it wasn't really until I was about, I think it might have been even the next year. I remember being 8, right before we moved to Ohio. We moved to Ohio when I was 8. I remember one of my parents had gotten a Reader's Digest book on unexplained mysteries. And I remember coming across the Bigfoot section in that book, and I was just stunned when there was remember someone had drawn a sketch of a Sasquatch, but it looked exactly like what I had seen in the forest. When I had that encounter, and I realized that it was a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, as was more the term back then. And ever since then, I remember trying to pretend to be a Sasquatch hunter when I was a little boy, walking around the neighborhood looking for Sasquatch tracks. And maybe it was my way of, I think it was my way of trying to cope with this experience that I had, instead of forcing it away and trying to ignore it. I think maybe I did try to do that, but my recurring nightmares would always kind of bring it up. At some point, I don't really remember when it was, but at some point I just put it into my mind that I was going to figure this out, and I was going to face it. Maybe it was a conversation with my mom. That I remember a brief conversation when I was younger, that she said, if you're afraid of something, sometimes the best thing to do is to face it, and it will go away. So in my own way, I did everything I could to face it, to read as much as I could, and I remember the day that I watched The Legend of Boggy Creek. That did not help anything at all. As a little boy, watching, especially after my experience, I was just like, it was just, oh man, I did not necessarily, it was fascinating to see that, of course, that film was very fascinating to me, but still, I remember being so scared after that for a week. Anytime it would come on after that, I was like, no, I can't. I'm not going to watch The Legend of Boggy Creek again. But I did. I really did try to read everything I could back then. Living in a small town, having a small library, there wasn't a whole lot of books available, but I did what I could, and when I got older, I branched out more and tried to read, get magazine subscriptions, and do as much research as I could.
John, considering the fact that you were only 7 when you had that encounter, when you're that young, it's awfully difficult to deal with stressful situations like that in your life. I know you really went through it, but it could have been a lot worse. It showed a lot of constitution to bounce back the way that you did. Now, moving forward, I want to talk about the Dogman encounter you had. But before you talk about that actual encounter and what you saw, lead us up to that encounter by telling us about why you were out there in the woods that day in the first place.
Sure. Well, at the time, I had just gone through a breakup with my girlfriend at the time. I was pretty sad. I was pretty broken up inside, and as I tend to do, especially if I'm going through something difficult in my life, especially emotionally, really the only place where I go to get solace for my ills is the forest. You know, I love nature so much, and it's like my real home, I feel, in many ways. I live in a town most of the time, so I don't have a direct access to be able to go out into the forest or into the woods. But when I'm able to, I do. When I was going through this difficult time, I went out to one of the state parks here that not too far away, and I went down one of the trails, and one of the habits that I tend to do is I'll go down the trail to certain points, and when nobody else is around, I'll take a sharp turn and go off trail, and I'll go off trail quite a ways, not too terribly far where I could possibly get lost, but enough to be far enough away where I'm not going to be interrupted, or there's, someone who will walk by on the trail. So I'm truly alone and secluded. I really enjoy that feeling when I'm in the woods, and in this case was no different. So it's probably about, I would say maybe about 100 yards off trail. Not too mountainous. I mean, it was hilly, of course, but the particular state park, off the top of my head, I wish I remembered the name of it, but went off trail at this park, and I went out to this area, and usually I just keep going until I feel like I've reached an area that's just untouched by man, that there isn't any logging or trees that have been cut down or anything like that. I like to be in an area where there isn't anything like that. This particular area that I got to this day, I was very familiar with the trails there, so I knew that there were no trails to the north of my location because I had traveled north off the trail. And now the area, this is a beautiful, pristine Pacific Northwest forest view, if you can imagine. Beautiful ferns all over the ground, trees, foliage that has come down from the Douglas fir trees that are all around, and there was a large tree that had come down at some point, and I had kind of set up a little, not a camp, but I put down my backpack and my knife and everything, and kind of got myself situated because I wanted to start a video blog. That day was going to be my first video blog. I had just gotten a new smartphone and had a nice camera on it, and I wanted to experiment with starting videos. And I thought this would be a good time just to kind of share my heart and kind of share what I was going through at the moment. And as I started my video, and you're able to look at yourself on the phone while you're making a video, so you can see what you look like, kind of strange, but I remember going into the circumstances of where my heart was at during that time, and after about 5 minutes of talking, I had heard, was kind of surprised by this, but I heard a baby cry to the northwest of my location where I was sitting on this log. I'm like, I didn't really just hear that, I got up and I looked and didn't see any movement, didn't see anything unusual, and usually I'm very aware of my surroundings, and nothing seemed unusual to me. So I continued on with my video because I really wasn't, my whole heart and soul was just kind of coming out at this point, and I was sharing that on this video. And as I was talking, I heard the baby cry again. It was more distinct the second time, and I stopped. And at that point, my my antenna kind of went up. At that point, like, okay, what possibly could be going on here? If there's anything unusual, and I got up. I stood up on the log, and I looked at the location of where the sound came from, and there was nothing out of place. There was nothing really, strange at all. I stood there for a good minute, just kind of observing and taking everything in, and I didn't really sense anything anything that was wrong at that point. But it was very unusual to hear something like that out there, knowing that there was no other trails or there were no other people around. So kind of very reluctantly, I started going back to my to my video and started talking again, and then I heard a noise kind of a little further to the north. The sounds I heard were coming from like the northwest, maybe it seemed to be about 60 to 70 feet away, and I heard more direct to my north. There was more of a hill, a little more pronounced hill. So I was kind of like down at the bottom of this hill, and I heard basically sounded like on the other side of the hill where it's kind of out of my view. I heard rustling of something kind of fairly large, an animal of some kind, of a movement, and that really kind of put me on edge at that point, since there were the three things happened that were kind of unusual. Sometimes you do come across wildlife in the forest, and I'm not unaccustomed to that, but I know enough at this point, with all of the research that I've done, that that something could be afoot. Um, so I got up and really tried, and I was using my camera too to pan and look, to see, if I, as a Sasquatch researcher, if by chance, hearing something like that, this would catch, one of the Sasquatch beings come out from behind a tree or something, and you got your camera going, that's golden right there, So I wasn't necessarily expecting that, but I didn't know what could be going on. I kind of just assumed it could just be an animal, a deer or something. But I didn't see anything. I didn't see any movement. But after standing there and being quiet for at least about 30 seconds after that movement, I noticed that all the sounds of the forest had gone quiet. And you can hear a pin drop. At that point, before that, there were birds chirping, that's typical, But I noticed that there was a silence that came upon the area, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I knew at that point that something was happening. And that's a good indicator that I could be in trouble at that point, because I'm fairly familiar with David Pilates' work, and people do go missing, especially up in the Pacific Northwest, and especially if you're alone, and especially if you go off trail. These things are all, I am aware of those things, and I do it knowingly, but I walk, I seek to be as aware as I possibly can. I try to be prepared when I go out, but I'm not going to live my life in fear because, if I was afraid I was going to go missing every time I go into the forest, I would never go into the forest. So I choose not to live that way. But having the forest go quiet like that, I've had it happen to me once before. Another an investigation I went on years prior, a Sasquatch investigation that I was on. The same thing happened to me then too, and I had an encounter then too. But it was a very eerie kind of calm that came over the area. So I was kind of on red alert at that point. But there was no movement. I didn't see anything. I had gotten my fairly large combat knife out, and I'm just ready, as ready as I could be, with my camera going and everything. And as I was looking at the top of this hill where I heard this movement come, I focused in on this point where I had thought I had seen, this point that how do I explain this? I guess I had noticed before. Either I had noticed before, or it had just appeared, and when my eyesight wasn't directly on that spot, and I had to take it. I remember after watching the video, I gasped because what I was looking at looked just like a extremely large wolf was staring at me up on the top of the hill, and it was kind of it wasn't right out in the open, but it was like nestled in between the foliage, like the fern and the bush, and I had to stop and say to myself, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? Is this a trunk of a tree, that a down tree, that can have odd shapes to it? I'm staring at, and I don't have 20/20 eyesight anymore. I wish I did. I don't wear glasses when I drive. I had fairly decent vision, but I don't have perfect vision anymore. So at this distance, which was about 60 to 70 feet away, were what I was looking at. This space, for lack of better terms, it looked just like a large wolf head staring at me with its mouth slightly open, and I could see not a whole lot of teeth, but I could see that the main canine teeth sticking out. And I remember saying to myself, and I have this on video, and I'm trying to focus in on my phone. I'm like, I gotta get this, And when you zoom in on one of these phones, the digital zoom, it kind of makes everything kind of distorted. So I don't think I really was able to get anything really well with the phone, but I was, with my own vision, I was looking at it like, I'm not really seeing this, am I? And it's like, I got to the point where it hadn't moved at all for about a minute, and the thought crossed my mind, like, maybe I should go up the hill and really check, because it's not moving at all. And then, as soon as I thought that, I saw movement of what looked like a tongue come out of its mouth, the stereotypical, like, licking the chop, kind of, where the tongue would go across the outside of the upper part of the jaw. And at that point, I almost dropped my phone, and I was like, oh crap, I gotta get out of here. You know, my first thought, of course, you know, I'm a father. My first thought was that I gotta get back to my son. You know, at that point, you know, I thought if I really am looking at a dog man, I'm in serious trouble. And I was kind of borderline whether or not I really, at that point, really knew if they existed or not. I mean, people do see all kinds of interesting cryptids throughout the world, and I'm very aware of that. But I never thought that I might ever come across something like that. But at that moment, I mean, it was like a shiver went down my spine, and like I have to get out. I have to, like, the fight or flight kind of response, and of course it was the flight response. And I have my video going, and I'm talking and trying to communicate what's going on, and at that point I'm talking to what it is I'm seeing. I'm like, okay, I'm leaving. You know, just chill out. Don't, you know, don't come after me. You know, I'm talking like this to it. You know, trying to almost kind of make the situation lighthearted. You know, because I would not be surprised if it could feel my fear, if it was what I was really seeing. If I had a really strong fear response, that might not be something that would be a good thing for me. So I'm trying to make the very serious and scary situation more kind of like lighthearted, and I'm communicating with it, and I get down and I'm picking up my backpack, and you know, and I got my knife in my hand, and I'm walking backwards, trying to not trip over the foliage and so forth, and I'm keeping my eye and the camera on that area, because if it started moving, at least if I disappeared, maybe the camera would get it before it got me. And if there was a search found for me, you know, a search for me, they might be able to recover my phone or something, you know. Those things, all those little thoughts came zipping through my mind, you know, as I'm trying to get out. And I really wanted to just run. I wanted to run as fast as I could, but I knew that if I did that, if it really was a dog man, if I really was seeing what I was seeing, that would be the worst response that I could probably do, especially being alone and off trail like that. And as soon as I was able to get down to a point where I was no longer in direct eyesight of what, that I couldn't see it, so that it couldn't see me, hopefully, I started to, really, I picked up my pace as much as I could without making it sound like I was running. You know, I didn't, the last thing I wanted to do is to make it seem like I was fleeing, because it might have a pursuit response, you know. So I continued that way, and really panning my whole area around me, both my own eyes and the camera, because I know at this point, with the knowledge that I have, that if there really is one, there very well and very possibly would be a second or more in the area. And I kept that in mind as I was trying to get out of the forest and trying to get back to the main trail. So ultimately, I got back. I was coming down the hill. I could see the trail in front of me, and thankfully, there were a couple people who were coming down the trail at the same time as I was coming down this hill, and I was very relieved, and just to be with someone, to be around other people after that experience. And the thought did come into my mind, and I'm kind of almost ashamed to think of it, but I thought, like, well, if this thing really does come after me, at least I have someone else in front of me to kind of throw them in the way, you know, or something. You know, self-preservation kind of just kicks in at that point, you know. But, you know, I was really thankful to get out of that and, you know, to get back on the trail and walk out and get into my car and breathe a huge sigh of relief, and I had to go back over the whole video of that experience, and I tell you, it was something I'll certainly never forget. And after that, that's when I really kind of like, okay, I need to know more about dogmen. I remember getting on Facebook and getting to be a part of your group, Vic, and then seeing and listening to dogman encounters and hearing other people's first-hand encounters and reading some of the stories and hearing some of the interviews. It's like, oh man, you know, my experience, if it was very mild compared to some of the others that have had first-hand encounters with these beings. But I felt something. One of the things that you know, I'm a fairly empathic person. A lot of my friends would call me psychic, but I don't necessarily like to use that term. But I do have a sixth sense about me, and I've used that, I guess, that gift over the years. It saved my butt many times in the past. But I remember when I saw what I saw up on the hill, my sixth sense screamed to me, you've got to get out. It wasn't just a natural fight or flight response to something that you think you saw, but there was more to it. It was like there was a deeper warning that came. I don't know if it was necessarily a communication, a telepathic communication from it that was telling me to get out of its territory, that I was in its territory or what, but there was definitely something else there that told me that I had to leave and I needed to get out as soon as I could. And that could just be, you know, my own gut reaction to the experience, but I really do feel that my intuition gave me a strong warning on top of that. So, which gives it, to me, a little more credence. Because I've seen things before, but my intuition hasn't kicked off like that. And so I don't give some of those, when that doesn't happen for me, when my intuition doesn't kick in and really speak to me about a situation, it's usually pretty accurate. But in this situation, it really spoke to me very loud and clear. And I know, you know, from my own research about with Sasquatch, people have not just a normal fear response. It's like there's a deeper fear that comes. Almost, maybe some people would like to say it's a paranormal induced fear, and maybe that was part of that. I'm not 100% sure, but it was something that I'm not going to forget for quite a while, and especially now when I go out into the woods, and I still do. I won't go back to that area where I was before, you know. You know, I'm not going to do that, but I can't, you know, if it wanted me, I wouldn't be here right now. I'm convinced, if it wanted to get me, as pretty much almost any of the encounters that people have with these kind of beings, that they're so powerful and so, I would imagine, so very dangerous, that if they really put it in their mind that you're their next meal or whatever whatever it might be, the reasons behind their attack, that they really wanted to attack, you really wouldn't stand a chance. I mean, that's my opinion. I could be wrong, but I think that these beings are, if you see them and you walk away in some way, shape, or form with your life, and you don't end up disappearing, they let you go. That's my opinion.
Oh, I'd say you're right. There's no doubt about that. When you look at how well equipped they are to kill even larger animals, it would be a situation where they decided to let you go, if that is in fact what happened. I'm a little fuzzy on something with regards to your encounter there, John. Did you at any point ever see that dogman's body or only its head?
I just saw its head. I didn't see anything else besides the face that was looking directly at me.
Was its head in a position where it had to be in an upright position, standing on two legs watching you? Or could that have possibly been a huge timber wolf, even though you don't have any timber wolves out in that area?
Well, it looked like it was closer to the ground. It didn't look like, at least from the perspective where I was, it looked much closer to the ground. It didn't look like it was high above the ground. Like if it was a dogman or a timber wolf, it was on all fours probably. Almost the kind of impression I got that it was sneaking up. Sneaking up to see me, and that kind of was the impression I got. So when I saw it, I had to double take. Like I was looking at scanning that whole particular area, because that's where I heard the rustling of the sound at first. And at one point I didn't see that, and then at another point I did see it. So I don't know. It's like it snuck up, or peeked its head out maybe when I just wasn't looking at that direct spot. I don't know.
Understand too, John, that dogmen can look just like a massive timber wolf when they go down on all fours. So considering the fact that there aren't any timber wolves in that area, you just might have been looking at a dogman, especially when you consider the size of its head that you were talking about seeing. As part of the after effects of that encounter, you had an interesting thing happen with the video that you recorded of that incident. Could you share the particulars of that with us?
Well, after I had that experience, I got into my car and I watched that whole video several times. I did upload it to my YouTube channel, and I had a few friends watch it, and they couldn't see anything when I zoomed in with the camera. They all got distorted. But what was all very clear was my own reaction to it. And one of my friends, after watching the video, he was like, "Man, that kind of reminded me of the Blair Witch Project." He was just like, "What?" The kind of reaction that I had to it, and the kind of feel that the video had was like that. And I had it on my channel for probably, I didn't have it on public. I had it unlisted because it was a private video. It wasn't something that I was experimenting with doing a video blog, and so it was kind of personal, and it was just something that I just wasn't going to try to promote, especially since I couldn't really make out what it was that I was seeing on the video. But after I started doing research and so forth on the Dog Man and getting part of your group and so forth, and remember there was a post that had come up on your group, and I remember commenting, it's like, I had an experience of a Dog Man, and, I even have a video about it. And they were like, oh, a couple of people on the post were like, oh, let's share it, please, So I'm like, oh, sure. So I go to my channel, and it's not there. And I'm like, oh, what? I have a couple channels. So I went, I put on the wrong channel, so I went and checked out all my channels, and it wasn't there. And I'm like, that's crazy. Why wouldn't it be there? So I go, I'm going to upload it again, Maybe YouTube took it down for some reason. I don't know. But I didn't get any indications, that there was anything wrong with it. So I go onto my phone to upload it again, and it's gone. I know, my first thought was like, well, the government hacked my phone and took it, took my picture, my video of the Dog Man, but I don't know what happened to it. It sounds crazy. It sounds like a tinfoil hat moment, But I tell you, I don't have an explanation for why I don't have it anymore. And I know the stereotypical response. I've been in the Sasquatch research community for a long time, and I know that the typical response to something like that, if that happened to somebody else, oh, I got it on video, but oh, the government took it, or, somebody comes out with that kind of a response, like, oh, right, yeah, you really did, huh? So I'm kind of like cynical about it at this point, where I know that I did it, I know it happened to me, I don't have an explanation for why I don't have it anymore, and I wish I did have it. I know that the capability of being able to go on a device like a smartphone and remove something like that, I know it's possible. I know it can be done. You just would never think that it would be that video. Why would they go through the trouble? Didn't really even show anything, but still, it disappeared, and I don't really have a rational explanation for it.
That is awfully strange. It sure sounds like you met with some kind of foul play, but like you said, we never will know what really happened to that video. It's a shame because it sounds like it would have been awfully interesting to watch. Well, John, it's time to wrap the show up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I do want to say thank you, Vic, for the kind of work that you do. To put yourself out like you are, to have a podcast, a website, and to do interviews like this. You're really putting yourself out there, and you're really doing great work, in my opinion. And I've seen a lot of people, especially in the Sasquatch community, do that. They put themselves out there, and they really want to be a voice in the community and so forth. And I've had friends who have been attacked, and it's not pleasant. It's a lot of times, and you put, especially something like Bigfoot or Dogman. Dogman. That's a crazy subject, and open to a huge amount of ridicule and things like that. I just want to tip my hat to you, Vic, because for me, if you weren't doing what you were doing, there would be a lot of people who wouldn't be able to tell their story. And I think this is important. I think it's a huge mystery that needs to be looked at and examined. I think you're doing a great job of doing it from all the stuff that you've been putting out.
Well, thank you for the good words there, John. I really do appreciate it. Don't feel too bad for me when you love what you do the way that I love doing this. it doesn't really matter if you have naysayers that don't agree with what you say or do. It's really no big deal or consequence to me. But I really want to thank you again for coming on the show. I really do appreciate your time.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again. Well, as you know, don't be a stranger, okay?
Okay, you got it.
I appreciate it. Well, have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.